says all that glitters isn't gold, investors in gold have been making some sky-high returns as prices click up to yet another record, climbing for the first time above $1,500 an ounce. Now, this commodity has more than doubled in price over the past 5 years, and much of that has been since back in November 2009. As you can see, the price of gold since June 2006 has gone from $580 an ounce to $1,176 and then $1,500. And it's easy to see why investors like this commodity so much, because with Japan being rocked by earthquakes, the Arab world in midst of a revolt, and also the Eurozone lurching from one crisis to the next, many investors have come to see gold as the ultimate safe haven. In fact, the World Gold Council estimates that there are about 170,000 tons worth of gold above ground right around the world. Let's see how they're distributed in terms of industries here. As you can see, the jewellery industry makes up about 50% of the world's gold. We've also got another 19% held by private investors, while central banks hold about 17% and industry accounts for about 12%. Let's come back to the question of government's gold reserves. They're not as evenly spread by any means as you might imagine. Take a look at this map. It shows you the world's largest gold reserves, and they're of course held in the United States. The US actually has 8,133 tons of gold, and crucially that makes up nearly 74% of the country's total reserves. Here's some other statistics that'll probably grab your attention. 4,600 tons of gold alone is held within the Fort Knox vaults. The second biggest gold holding country is this one. It's Germany. As you can see, it holds 3,401 tons of gold, and that accounts for 69% of its reserves. But not all of the countries around the world are that keen on gold. Take a look at this. It's China. It has over 1,000 tons of gold, but that only accounts for 1.7% of its vast savings. Now, a committed gold skeptic is this man. It's Warren Buffett. Back in April 2009, he made this quote. He said, "It gets dug out of the ground in Africa or someplace like that," he said. "Then we melt it down, dig another hole, bury it again, pay people to stand around guarding it." And he also says it has no utility. Anyone watching from Mars would be scratching their head if they saw us do that. So it seems as though Warren Buffett is not convinced by the Midas touch.
I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano, and this is Freedom Watch. Is there any gold in Fort Knox? Now, the question sounds like a joke, sort of like the one about who's buried in Grant's tomb. But suddenly, it's a very serious question that's become a part of the major national financial reform debate. After the financial turmoil of the past 2 years and the related decline in the value of the dollar, gold has become an even hotter commodity than usual. That's a reminder to hardcore free market advocates that a gold standard once was used to back our currency, making it harder for the government simply to print more money willy-nilly to cover its bills. Not surprisingly, the Federal Reserve has been resistant to an audit of its money printing and money lending activities, even as the idea of an audit has become more popular on both sides of the aisle and in both houses of Congress. More surprisingly, though, they've also been resistant to a simple audit of their gold supplies at Fort Knox and in the New York Fed's vaults. Why? Is there less gold there than there is supposed to be? Has the United States government sold off more of its gold since going off the gold standard than we were led to believe? Joining me now to talk about all of this is the chair of the Mises Institute and a champion of free markets and sound money, Lou Rockwell. Lou, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Judge, great to be with you.
Is there any gold left in Fort Knox?
Well, I think we'd like to find out. Ron Paul talks about this, why there ought to be an audit. There has not been an audit since the 1950s. And we know that a vast amount of gold flowed out of the United States in the late 1960s and early 1970s under LBJ and Nixon because of all the inflation right at the end of the Bretton Woods system. So how much gold is there? We don't know. So Ron Paul says, how about an audit of the Fed, of the gold stock? What do they got? But they resist. Why do they resist? As you said, it's the question.
Right. Well, one could only speculate as to why they resist. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Congressman Paul's original piece of legislation, which we all know by its nomenclature, H.R. 1207, which was passed by the House of Representatives, would have provided for such an audit. But once it got watered down in the Senate, and the watered down version is now on its way back to the House, it doesn't include that audit at all. It's basically reduced to just an audit of the banks that the Fed bailed out, not under TARP, but under the stimulus programs that preceded and succeeded TARP. So without some new legislation, we won't know if there's any gold left in Fort Knox, or if there is, who owns it.
Well, and these are important issues, and I must say I tend to be a skeptic when it comes to the government in every sense. I tend to assume that everything they say is a lie. Now, everything they say is not a lie, but most of what they say is a lie. So seems to me they need to prove to us, need to let an independent assayers go in there, count the gold, and test some of the bars to see, are they gold? Same with the vaults of the New York Fed. Who owns the gold in the vaults of the New York Fed? Is it foreign governments? Is it the IMF? Is it the U.S. government? Is it the Fed itself? They stonewall on this as well, and I think we have the right, as Ron Paul certainly does, to know what the heck is the real story.
In 1933, in an executive order, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, on his own, made it illegal for private persons to own gold. About 2 weeks later, the Congress, kowtowing, enacted legislation that tracked the executive order and said, okay, the president's already done this. We will now make it really illegal for Americans to own gold. Eventually, that was changed. In 1973, President Nixon took us off the gold standard. Question. I want you to speculate, Lou. I want you to dream a little bit. What would life be like today had FDR and the Congress not made it illegal to own gold, and had President Nixon not taken us off the gold standard?
Well, Judge, if we were still on a gold standard, and this is going to sound a little bit like science fiction, but this was the case all throughout American history, and indeed all throughout the history of the world under a gold standard, your money, your savings becomes more valuable each year. Even if you don't get a raise, your paycheck buys more. The savings that a young person puts away in their 20s when they want to spend them in their 70s buy more. This is the way a free market society operates, because they're not expanding the money supply, but the goods and services are being expanded, so money becomes more valuable. This is the way it's supposed to be. It requires vast efforts by the government, by the Federal Reserve, to actually turn this around and make our money depreciate and make its value diminish and even disappear. And so also, by the way, we'd have far more freedom, because a gold standard strictly restricts the government's ability to do a lot of the crazy unconstitutional stuff they do today. So they can only do it when they can print up the money.
So a Democrat and a Democratic Congress, FDR and the Congress in 1933, and a Republican president on his own have succeeded in taking away freedom, opportunity, prosperity, and property for what? So that the government can print money to pay its bills.
And these, by the way, you know, as you pointed out, these are acts by these two presidents that are the acts of a dictator. These are not anything the founding fathers envisioned. The president being able to confiscate everybody's money or change the monetary system of the whole country just by signing a piece of paper and issuing it like he's Caesar Augustus.
Lou Rockwell, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.
You can catch today's show on foxnews.com/freedomwatch and on Sirius 145, XM 168, or online at foxnewstalk.com at 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. From New York, defending freedom. Until the next time, stay free, America.
And now for the last question of all. Why would our government do such a thing? I hope you're sitting down. First, we have Larry Silverstein, the man who purchased the World Trade Center in July 2001. After September 11th, Silverstein demanded $7.2 billion from his insurers, claiming that each plane counted as a separate act of terrorism. However, on December 6th, 2004, the courts only reward him with $2.2 billion. Next, we have the put options that were placed on United Airlines, American Airlines, and Boeing. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, more than $2.5 million has remained unclaimed. As for 9/11 itself, Reuters reported that Comvar, a German computer company, is responsible for helping companies and accountants in New York restore their data from over 400 hard drives that were recovered from the World Trade Center's rubble. Comvar recovered information from 32 different computers that suggested insider trading took place on 9/11. Richard Wagner, an expert at Convar. There is a suspicion that some people had advanced knowledge of the approximate time of the plane crashes in order to move out amounts exceeding $100 million. They thought that the records of their transactions could not be traced after the mainframes were destroyed. After their analysis, Convar handed the results over to the FBI. Although the FBI was legally bound to investigate who was responsible, to date they have done no such thing. Moving on. According to Wikipedia, one of the world's largest gold depositories was stored underneath the World Trade Center. In 1993, the value of the gold was estimated at $1 billion, rumored to be owned by Kuwaiti interests. When the World Trade Center was destroyed, the amount of gold far exceeded the 1993 levels. The gold was finally recovered in its entirety in late 2001. Or was it? On November 1st, 2001, the Times Online reported that a large amount of gold was discovered in the wreckage of the World Trade Center. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani announced that more than $230 million was recovered from Ground Zero. However, the COMEX Metals Trading Division was storing gold bars for the Bank of Nova Scotia, Chase Manhattan Bank, Bank of New York, Hong Kong, and Shanghai Banking, totaling $950 million. And that's just one company. Rumor has it that over $160 billion in gold was stored in the World Trade Center. So where did all the gold go? Remember the gold that was found in November 2001? Reuters reported that it was discovered in the back of a 10-wheel truck, along with several cars, in a delivery tunnel underneath World Trade Center 5. No bodies were recovered. As workers got closer to the gold, authorities began restricting access to Ground Zero, joined by FBI and Secret Service agents. One worker, who was directed away from the tunnel, told a reporter, "If I tried to go down there, they would have shot me." Heavy machinery operators and others worked under the watchful eye of more than 100 armed officers. So let me get this straight. Gold from World Trade Center 4 was found underneath World Trade Center 5 in an empty delivery truck with an empty escort of cars. I think it's safe to say that they were running away from the South Tower. The question is, how did they know to flee from their stash when not even the firefighters inside the South Tower expected it to collapse? $167 billion in gold. $200 million is found. And that's just the money. After September 11th, President Bush had and continues to have permission to do and say whatever he wants, all under the pretext of 9/11. The Patriot Act, the Department of Homeland Security, Afghanistan, Iraq.
Got him. Good. Second one. Hit the other one.
It's time for America to accept 9/11 for what it was. A lie which killed thousands of people, only in turn killing hundreds of thousands more to make billions upon trillions of dollars. Are you angry yet? You should be. Every single attempt to investigate and uncover the truth behind 9/11 has been blackballed, ridiculed, and harassed by both the government and media alike for even daring to question the official story.
Jimmy Walter, who spent nearly $2 million on an advertising blitz to convince people here in New York and elsewhere that 9/11 was a self-inflicted wound. Jimmy, welcome. Why are you doing this?
I'm a patriot trying to defend this country from the real terrorists who have damaged and changed our country. I am asking the same questions that the widows and orphans, parents and friends of the victims of 9/11 are asking and have not had answered by either the 9/11 Commission nor by any real investigation to the mass murders that 66% of New Yorkers want investigated.
Okay, Jimmy.
The U.S. is trying to stop the gold rush to Iran in a bid to undermine the Islamic Republic's plummeting currency, but critics say the move is more likely to hurt ordinary citizens than the rogue regime's leadership. A top Treasury Department official told lawmakers that, starting July 1, the U.S. plans to crack down on all transfers of gold to the Iranian government or its citizens. The move appears aimed largely at banks and gold brokers in Turkey and the United Arab Emirates. Companies operating from within those nations have shipped large amounts of gold to Iran as Tehran attempts to stabilize its currency, the rial, amid increasing international economic isolation. We have been very clear with the governments of Turkey and the UAE and elsewhere, as well as the private sector that is involved in the gold trade, that as of July 1 all must stop, not just the trade to the government, Treasury Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence David Cohen told members of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee last week. The rial has lost two-thirds of its value against the dollar since late 2011, largely as a result of U.S.-led sanctions targeting the banking system and oil exports. The sanctions are in response to Iran's ongoing nuclear weapons program. The U.S. can impose sanctions on foreign companies that violate the Iran policy, as long as those companies also seek to do business with parties in the U.S. To date, the Obama administration has not penalized any companies in Turkey or the UAE for trading in gold with Iran. There's a tremendous demand for gold among private Iranian citizens, which in some respects is an indication of the success of our sanctions, Cohen said. They are dumping their rials to buy gold as a way to try to preserve their wealth. That is, I think, an indication that they recognize that the value of their currency is declining. Some economists questioned whether the gold squeeze can be effective against the Islamic regime. It is not clear to me that banning the sale of gold to private Iranian citizens is going to increase pressure on the Iranian government, Milken Institute economist Komal Srikumar told FoxNews.com. While banning the sale of essential goods and service has a depressive effect on an economy, banning gold sales simply removes one safety valve that the residents would have had. It means, then, that the rial cannot be used by residents to purchase gold. They have to use the currency to buy domestic real estate, goods and services to hedge against inflation. In turn, this would probably hurt residents more than it would the rulers, he added. In February, the Central Bank of Iran claimed that the country holds 907 tons of gold, roughly worth $17.5 billion in reserves. Officials for the agency added in reports that the nation had purchased gold in recent years at an average of $600 per ounce. While gold reached a price of 3 times that during its recent run, it has fallen below $1,400 per ounce. The new effort is the latest in sanctions imposed by the US and Europe against Iran. In 2011, a sanctions law was signed by President Obama that led a full embargo on crude oil and gas products, which cost the Iranian government of billions of dollars in revenue. But many agree that the most likely to suffer from the embargo will be ordinary citizens and not the regime. Our position is that economic sanctions should target the government and not the entire people, Hadi Ghimi, executive director of the International Campaign for Human Rights in Iran, told FoxNews.com. Crippling sanctions will hurt average Iranians, strengthen the regime, and play into their hands by blaming misery of the people and all of the government's shortcomings on the West. We wish to see targeted sanctions against the regime and its officials, not the entire people of Iran, he added. We already have serious shortages in medical, food and industrial sectors of Iran, with Iranian people paying a heavy price, while the regime's cronies getting richer due to the economic environment created through black market, smuggling and inflation.